Hello, I'm Eddie Parker. Welcome to another episode of Gulf Coastal Connections. Today we're going to be talking about our favorite little mollusk, the oyster. Now, oysters in New Orleans go together like Bourbon Street and Bad Decisions. Down here, oysters aren't just food, they're a way of life. They help build the land, clean the water, and keep thousands of people employed. Whether they're served raw, char-grilled, or deep-fried, Louisiana oysters have a flavor and history all their own. This is a deep dive into 10 of the best oyster houses in the French Quarter. The stories behind them and a few facts to help you hold your own in an oyster-themed trivia contest. So grab a cold beer, maybe a squeeze of lemon, and get ready to explore some of the briniest bites in town. Now there is only one place the story of oysters in New Orleans could start, and that is at ACME on Iberville in the French Quarter. It's the kind of place where the smell of briny, sizzling seafood hits you before you even get through the door. And yeah, there's probably a line, but don't let that spook you. It moves because folks come here knowing exactly what they want, and they don't waste time pretending otherwise. These oysters are some of the best in the whole country, and they get shucked, slurped, and sent on their way with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Now, I'm not trying to tell you how to live your life, but if you have a bum liver, a touchy stomach, or your immune system isn't exactly what the good Lord intended, you may want to think twice about slurping down raw oysters. Heck, even if you're built like a dang ox, there's still a chance that these little ocean boogers could do you dirty. So if you aren't the gambling type, maybe stick to the fried ones. Just saying. Now you don't come to Acme Oyster House for delicate plating or for some chef's creative interpretation of a thing that's been perfect since long before he was born. You come here for the honest, unvarnished truth of the sea. Cold, briny, sliding straight down your throat like a baptism in salt water and scent. At Acme, there's a right way to eat an oyster on the half shell, the old-fashioned way. You lift that shell like it holds something sacred, because it does, and you let the oyster in all its perfect raw ocean-born defiance slide straight down your throat. Acme's been here since 1910, through fire and flood and all the other natural disasters. Louisiana throws at a thing to see if it's tough enough to survive, and Acme is. Time couldn't touch it, fancy white tablecloth places couldn't outshine it, and all the folks trying to turn eating oysters into a fussy affair couldn't change it. You come to Acme for the real deal, for something raw and real in a world that's too often polished. And if you don't get it, if you sit there trying to figure out how to eat something that's been eaten the same way for over 100 years, well, there's a Hard Rock Cafe up the street that'd be happy to have you. But if you do get it, if you shuck one back and taste the wild, perfect thing that it is, if you let the salt and cold and heat and history of this place run through you like a current, then you'll understand. Acme isn't just a restaurant, y'all. It's a living, breathing thing. Older than most of us and tougher than all of us. And every oyster you eat here makes you part of it. Nobody is out here slinging oysters like Louisiana. We pull in 30 to 40% of all the oysters eaten in the United States and have been the top dog in oyster landings since 2000. Now, that's 12 to 14 million pounds of salty, slippery goodness every year. If you're knocking back a dozen on the half shell, odds are they came straight out of the great state of Louisiana. Right across the street from Acme is another world-famous oyster house. Felix's Oyster Bar is where tradition meets briny perfection, where the old ways aren't just remembered, they're celebrated. Now back in the 40s, when folks were still figuring out how to make an oyster bar a thing, Felix was already a couple dozen deep, making believers out of everyone lucky enough to belly up to the counter. They just didn't follow the trend, they were the trend. After 70 years in the Quarter, Felix's isn't just a restaurant, it's an institution. Locals swear by it, tourists stumble in wide-eyed, and everybody leaves knowing they just had some of the best oysters in the country. fresh as the Gulf, shucked by hands that have been doing it longer than most people have been alive, and served up with a side of no nonsense. Felix knows exactly what it is, and that's why people keep coming back. Now, down here, you learn to eat raw oysters like you learn to swim. Get thrown in the bayou and figure it out. That means a saltine, a squeeze of lemon, a dab of cocktail sauce, a hit of Tabasco, and then straight on down. Felix's didn't just become famous, they became sacred ground. This is the kind of joint where locals, tourists, and people who don't even like oysters show up to see what the fuss is all about. They leave believers. It's not nostalgia that keeps folks coming back. It's that very first bite and the realization that you just tasted something timeless. Felix's isn't just a restaurant. It's a legacy, a love letter to the Gulf of Mexico, a testament to the simple fact that some things like an oyster on a cracker, aren't meant to be messed with. P&J Oyster Company has been keeping New Orleans shucking since 1876, slinging fresh Gulf of Mexico oysters to French Quarter bars and restaurants for nearly 150 years. If you've ever knocked back a raw one in the quarter, chances are P&J had a hand in it. Antoine's has been standing there on St. Louis Street since before the Civil War, long before air conditioning, before jazz even. Sweating out the years with the kind of Creole grandeur that demands you put on a nice jacket and pretend you weren't just drinking out of a Go Cup 2 blocks away. It is old New Orleans, not just a restaurant, but a shrine to the idea that fine dining should feel like a Catholic ceremony. It's the kind of place where the ghosts wear cufflinks and never raise their voice above a polite murmur. And Oyster Rockefeller? Well, that's its own religion. Jules Alciatori, son of the founder, whipped it up in 1889 because folks were running low on snails. So he took oysters, drowned them in some secret green potion richer than a Louisiana oil tycoon, and baked them to high heaven. By 1980, they had sold millions of them, and to this day, nobody knows what's in that sauce. People try to copy it, but Antoine's will die before they admit what's really in it. Spinach? No, they say. That'd be too easy. Now look, I love eating at Antoine's, but some days you don't feel like making the whole thing out of it. Some days you just want the food without the formality, the flavor without the fuss. So I headed over here to COTERIE NOLA, which is less 1840s gentleman club and more sports bar with a great seafood hookup. Exposed brick, a casual coastal crowd, and waitstaff who don't side-eye you for showing up in a t-shirt. Their version of Oyster Rockefeller? Well, it's got spinach in it, and cheese, and breadcrumbs, and it ain't a state secret, but it is dang tasty. Hot and bubbling. It's the kind of thing that pairs well with a cold beer and no fancy dress code. It may not be Antoine's, but it'll do just fine when you're hungry and don't feel like putting on a tie. It's also a testament to what happens when you learn how to make good oyster decisions. Thanks to the Mississippi River, our oysters are big, meaty, and have a mild, earthy bite that sets them apart from the salty Atlantic ones and the sweet Pacific ones. You can't miss it, it wouldn't let you. That big, gaudy marquee, shining like a Vegas casino hustling the trucker's last 20. It ropes in the wary, the reckless, and the hungry with the promise of salt, fire, and butter-soaked salvation. Bourbon in Bienville is one of the most photographed corners in the French Quarter. But trust me, pictures don't do it justice. gotta step inside to feel it. Hear the scrape of chairs against tile. Smell that thick cloud of briny, smoky goodness creeping up to the pressed tin ceiling like the ghost of a million past meals. This isn't a place you just pass through. It sticks to you, like butter on your shirt or regret on a Sunday morning. And we're here for the charred grilled oysters. That's the whole sermon. The altar, the offering, and the benediction. If that doesn't sound like your kind of religion, go on and order a salad and let the rest of us get to church.
Don't be lost when the time comes. For the day of the Lord cometh as a thief in the night.
Now, let's be clear. Dragos and Metri gave us this greasy gospel back in '93. Mr. Tommy Satanovich looked at what folks were doing to redfish, shrugged, and said, why not? So, fire met shell, butter met garlic, cheese melted down into a rich, reckless indulgence. And the next thing you know, Louisiana had itself a new sacrament. And here at the Desire Oyster House, they are not messing around. These oysters hit the table still spitting fire, still whispering the name of the pit that baptized them. They glisten like temptation itself. Butter thick as sin, garlic so heavy in the air, it's practically a marriage proposal. That Parmesan crusts up on the edges like it knows it's about to change your life. And the taste? Soft, briny, smoky perfection. Salvation on a half shack. And then, old buddy, then you take the bread. Drag it through that bubbling pool of butter and brine, soaking up every last drop. And then savor the flavor like it's the last thing you're ever going to eat.
Yes! Yes! Jesus H. Goddamn Christ! I have seen the light!
Desire Oyster Bar reminds you why people show up to New Orleans in the first place. It's not just the food, not just the booze, not just the music, but this, that moment when you lean back in your chair, belly full, hands greasy, heart contented, and you know, with absolute certainty, you wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the world right now. And really, why would you? Yeah, you can get Louisiana oysters year-round, but if you really want to do it right, stick to the months with an R. From November to April, that cooler water makes them plumper, tastier, and perfect for slurping straight off the shell. Alright, listen up. There are a lot of ways to eat an oyster in Louisiana, but if you haven't had one fried and slapped onto French bread, then son, you haven't lived yet. And if you're in New Orleans looking for the real deal, you're down here at Johnny's Poor Boys and getting a sandwich so overstuffed it will have you questioning your life choices in the best way possible. Johnny's has been slinging poor boys since 1950 when Johnny and Betty DeGrousa ran a humble, hybrid grocery sandwich shop on the honor system. The real magic? Big, messy, gut-busting sandwiches stuffed with whatever they could fry, coat, or smother in gravy. In a city fueled by poor boys, their fried oyster version is pure gospel. Now, a proper fried oyster poor boy is a thing of beauty. You start with Louisiana oysters, fat, briny, begging for the fryer. They get dunked in seasoned cornmeal, fried up golden and crispy, then piled onto a loaf of Liedenheimer French bread that somehow manages to be both crusty and pillory at the same time. Then comes the dressing. Mayo, shredded lettuce, tomatoes, pickles. Simple, because when oysters are this fresh and crispy, you don't need much else. You take that first bite, and it is all there. The crunch of the bread, the snap of the fried oysters, the little hit of acid from the pickles, the creamy mayo laying it all together. It's the kind of sandwich that makes you forget whatever nonsense is waiting for you in the outside world. You sit here, elbow deep in paper napkins, watching tourists fumble with their first poor boy like they just discovered fire. and you know you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Johnny's isn't fancy. It's not trying to be, but it's been here for 3 generations, through hurricanes, boom, bust, and the general chaos that is New Orleans. And still, the oysters get fried, the sandwiches get made, and people keep showing up. Because in a world where everything changes, a good oyster po' boy is something you can still count on. Oysters are both wild and farmed. While wild oysters are still harvested, many Louisiana oysters are commercially bottom farmed or raised in cages. These methods produce plumper, creamier textured oysters that are popular for charbroiling, baking, and raw consumption. Down in the heart of the French Quarter sits an oyster house called the Mississippi River Bottom, MRB to the initiated. And if you're drinking in a place called the Mississippi River Bottom, you've already accepted a certain level of depravity. This is a bar where riverboat gamblers, pirates, and multiple men named Bubba have made bad decisions for generations. You just came in for a Saints game and woke up at 3 a.m. deep in conversation with a man who swears he was smuggling rum up the Bayou before the Coast Guard called up to him back in '32. It's got all the dive bar essentials. Multiple courtyards, sharks, and a ghost in the women's bathroom. Because of course there is. Once a brothel, it carries whispers of speakeasy days, gangland murders, and folklore that makes it feel like time just isn't done with it yet. But look, we didn't come here just for the ghosts or the conspiracies. We came here to eat. And the only right answer is the Oysters Menard. Now, let's get one thing straight. These aren't just oysters. This is something more, something bigger, something dang near holy. They start with fat Louisiana oysters, the kind that still taste like they remember the sea. And then they char grill them, and butter so rich it should probably come with a wheel riding service. Then comes the Parmesan, melting in the crevices like it was always meant to be there. The garlic butter seeping deep. The Roma tomatoes bringing just a whisper of sweetness before the fresh jalapenos slap you awake. That first bite, it's a revelation. You taste the slow burn that builds like a story you already know the ending to, but want to hear it again anyway. By the time you go for another, you've already decided this is the only way oysters should be eaten. Forks become irrelevant. Napkins too. There's just you, the oysters, and the knowledge that life doesn't hand out too many moments this perfect. So you better enjoy it while it still lasts. And that's MRB, a place where you can drink, eat, sweat just a little less than usual, and maybe, just maybe, catch a glimpse of something bigger than yourself, be it a ghost in the bathroom or just a perfect bite of an oyster. Smoky and rich, tasting like the Gulf, and the fire that tamed it. So whatever you're looking for, football, a haunted bathroom, or just an excuse to linger a little longer, MRB has got you covered. Alright y'all, let's give it up for oysters, nature's little water purifiers. These slimy little heroes aren't just delicious, they're working overtime to clean up Louisiana's waters. As filter feeders, they suck in the nasty stuff and spit out cleaner water, kind of like a Brita filter, but with a shell. One single oyster can filter up to 50 gallons of water a day. So next time you're knocking back a dozen, just remember, you're eating seafood and supporting an all-natural cleanup crew. The Royal Oyster House, like so many other fine New Orleans institutions, started its life as something else. Back in the day, this was just somebody's home, full of high ceilings and wrought iron balconies. But New Orleans took one look at it and in true Crescent City fashion, decided it would make a much better restaurant. And so, COTERIE's was born. Not your run-of-the-mill red sauce joint here. They were serving up some of the real deal Italian cooking that put them in the same breath with some of the finest restaurants in the French Quarter. And they held their own for decades. right up until Katrina came through like the wrath of God, shutting doors, scattering memories, and leaving behind another empty husk of what once was. But New Orleans doesn't let the good ones stay dead, at least not for long. In 2008, their Maury brothers came in, knocked off the dust, and gave the place a second life as the Royal House. And now, all these years later, it's still standing, still serving, still proving that in this town, history ain't something you read about, it's something you eat. And speaking of eating, let's talk about something dang near sacramental, the Oyster Babylon. Now, this is what happens when someone with a deep love of butter and bad decisions decides to go full mad scientist in the kitchen. They start with fat, salty Gulf oysters, smother them in creamy spinach, bacon, Parmesan, and a hint of anise, just enough to make licorice feel like a good idea. This is a buttery indulgence that feels like it needs a warning label or a confessional booth. You take that first bite and suddenly the world makes sense. The brininess of the oyster, the silk of the spinach, the smoky whisper of the bacon, the sharp salt of the Parmesan, all swirling together in a bite so perfect, it feels like it's a sin. Wash it down with something cold and let yourself sink a little deeper into the moment, into the history, into the undeniable fact that New Orleans knows how to do food in a way that no place else on earth ever could. Royal House isn't just a restaurant. It's proof that nothing in this city ever really disappears. It just gets a little louder, a little messier, and a little more full of life. Alright, let's talk oysters. They're not just beer snacks, they're coastal engineers. Down here in Louisiana, these little bivalves build reefs that work like coral, giving fish and crabs a home while holding the coast together. And here's the kicker. Louisiana has some of the biggest oyster reefs left in the whole world. While other places wreck their shorelines, our oysters are still putting in the work and tasting darn good while they do it. New Orleans has been eating oyster Bienville for generations, and in that time, it has become more than just a dish. It's a statement, an edible monument to the city's long, tangled past. In 1930s New Orleans, where food and booze were equally sacred, Arnaud Cazeneuve of Arnaud's Restaurant set out to create something indulgent enough for the city's revelers. Oysters Bienville, named after the city's founder, was his answer. And it worked. Oysters Bienville became a French Quarter classic, surviving Prohibition, World Wars, and generations of tourists spilling hurricanes on Bourbon Street. It's a dish born of excess, perfected in a city that never once been accused of subtlety. But we're not going to eat at Arnaud's because it doesn't open until 5:30, and we're going to be long gone by then. Instead, we're eating over here at Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House, where the Oyster Bienville is just as good and you need no reservations. Like the city itself, Oyster Bienville is rich, flamboyant, decadent, and entirely unapologetic. This isn't some humble half-shell affair. Oh no, it is a dish designed for people who dressed up for dinner but weren't always sure how they'd get home. Plump oysters baked under a rich, boozy sauce of shrimp, mushrooms, butter, and enough decadence to make a priest nervous. It's a dish that doesn't whisper, it declares itself, the same way New Orleans always has. And whether you're eating it at a white tablecloth institution or perched on a bar stool with a cold beer in your hand, one thing's for sure, you're tasting history, one indulgent bite at a time. So you gotta get yourself down to Mr. Ed's, where the oysters arrive sizzling, no reservation is required, no ceremony needed, just hot, buttery excess on a plate. And in the end, what more could you ask for? Louisiana oysters are low in calories, but rich in protein, healthy fats, vitamins, and minerals like calcium, iron, and vitamin A, making them a delicious, nutritious part
of the state's culinary heritage.
Now down here on Bourbon Street, history doesn't sit quietly in some museum. It leans against a light post with a drink in one hand and a half-shucked oyster in the other. And there's a place down here that's lived more lives than most folks you'll ever meet. It started off simple enough, a family home back in the 1880s, a place where the Jean Vatir clan could lay their heads, probably thinking they found themselves a nice, quiet corner of the French Quarter to live out their days. But New Orleans don't do quiet, and by 1944, that prim and proper home had reinvented itself as Stormy's Casino Royale, a burlesque joint where a woman named Evangeline the Oyster Girl made her name doing Lord knows what with shellfish, leaving a legacy scandalous enough to fog up a priest's reading glasses. Then came Al Hertz, a jazz club so full of brass and bourbon-soaked reveille that the walls probably still hum with the echoes of a trumpet solo. From 1962 to 1983, this is where the sound of the city lived, where the music spilled into the streets and wrapped around your ribs, making sure you felt it in your bones before you ever knew what hit you. But even the best songs have to end, and when the jazz died down, the food took center stage. First with 5 O'Clock Grill, then with Cajun Cabin, where the gumbo was rich, the music was loud, and the only rule was to eat good and dance like you meant it. And now, the Bayou Restaurant and Oyster Bar is still doing it, still keeping the quarter fed, still making sure nobody walks past without at least thinking about pulling up a chair. And if you know what's good for you, you'll sit down and order the Asian Cajun oysters. Now listen, this ain't your standard half-shell situation here. This is what happens when the Gulf meets the Far East, when brine and fire shake hands and decide to make something better. 6 oysters, fresh as sin, sitting pretty on the half-shell. But they ain't alone. They're topped with pickled jalapeno, sharp and fiery enough to wake up whatever part of your soul has been sleeping for far too long. And then it gets hit with citrus ponzu, a sauce so bright and sharp it practically makes your mouth tune into a higher frequency. It's a bite that doesn't ask permission, it just takes over. And here's the deal with La Bayou Oyster Bar. It ain't some fussy dressed up tourist trap version of New Orleans. Here, it's the real deal. It's history, it's music, it's a food that doesn't just fill you up, but gets into you. The kind of meal that reminds you why you're in New Orleans in the first place. So if you're strolling down Bourbon Street and you catch a whiff of something that stops you dead in your tracks, follow it. Chances are, it's leading you right here to the Bayou Oyster Bar, right to a table, right to a plate of oysters that'll make you wonder why you ever ate them any other place. Louisiana's oyster industry is an economic powerhouse. The industry supports nearly 4,000 direct jobs and generates approximately $317 million annually, benefiting harvesters, processors, shippers, dealers, retailers, and of course restaurants. If you want to know where New Orleans locals go when they want seafood that actually remembers the Gulf of Mexico and not some sad, pre-frozen, overpriced chain restaurant excuse for it, Deanie's is the answer. For over 60 years, this joint has been slinging some of the best seafood New Orleans has to offer, the kind meant to be piled high on a table and shared with good company. They got 3 spots across the city, plus their original seafood market out in Bucktown near Lake Pontchartrain, where the fish is so fresh, it probably remembers its last swim. Everything's made from scratch, just like it ought to be, using nothing but the finest Louisiana and Gulf bounty. Whether it's fried, broiled, or boiled, they stick to the old ways, because when you've been feeding folks this long, you don't fix what ain't broke. Now people come here for a lot of things. Their famous fried seafood platters, their golden fried onion rings, and of course, their tasty, tasty shrimp. But today we're talking about something even more serious, their barbecued oysters. These bad boys are oven broiled, on the half shell, then basted in a signature buttery blend of seasoning so rich, it ought to have a trust fund. How is that for French Quarter decadence? You take that first bite and suddenly you understand everything. Why New Orleans folks side-eye tourist traps. Why fresh oysters don't need fancy tricks. Why butter is probably the closest thing to divine intervention we'll ever know. Find yourself wandering through the French Quarter, wondering where to get oysters from someone who actually respects the oyster? Skip the overpriced nonsense and find your way down here to Deanie's. I want to personally thank you for watching this video. And here's what I want out of you. I want you to subscribe. I want you to follow. I want you to smash that like button, and I want you to share this video far and wide. And remember, it's not goodbye, it's see you next week on Gulf Coastal Connections.
1, 2,